All right, our learning is Lili Nishmas Mintal Mariam Bas Kalman Reuven and Neshama Shem Aliyah. We are up to Kuf Aleph Amud Beis by the two dots, and we're going to continue discussing ships. So, if you remember, the Mishnah said Spinos Kishuros, ships that are tied together, you're allowed to carry from one ship to another. Now, the Gemara at this point assumes that the ships all belong to one person. Okay, so the Mishnah is saying is that if you have a bunch of ships that are tied together, let's say you own a bunch of ships and you have all your ships tied together, and keep in mind that's how typically they would tie their ships together at sea, and they would be able to transfer items from one to another. And the Mishnah is saying you're allowed to carry from one ship to another, to which the Gemara says, Pshita, this is obvious. Of course, if there are ships tied together and they all belong to you, of course you're allowed to carry from one to another. Rava, so Rava comes along and says, no, what the chiddush is, the novelty is, lo nitzrucha elahatir bitzis shebeinehen. What the Mishnah is actually allowing is not just going from one ship to another, but what it's allowing for is that the ships are tied, but even when we talk about tied, they're not necessarily all touching directly, and there's a small boat that's wedged between two of the big ships, right? Keep in mind, if you've ever been on a large ship, like a cruise or whatever it is, they usually have these like small rafts or small boats that are attached to them, they're off to the side, and they have different functions. Oftentimes they'll go, like, again, the ship is not going to come all the way into shore, so they'll come next to the shore, then the small boats will come and take the people back and forth, or things of that nature. So over here, what we have is people are resting for Shabbos, okay? So the person has their big ships, they tie their ships together, so the person could go from one to another, and then they wedge the small boat between them. And what the Mishnah is allowing is not just going from the big ships that are attached together, which is obvious, because if they're attached, then they become one entity, right? What it's allowing for is you have the small boat which is wedged in between, which is not attached, and one could say maybe there's a concern that the small boat would, detach from being wedged in between, and therefore a person's going to be in the ocean, which we said is what? Not Rosh Hashanah, but a Carmelis. Very good, right? So it's a Carmelis, and a person will end up in the Carmelis. No, Kamash Malan, what the Mishnah is, what Rav explains, the Mishnah is teaching us is that you're actually allowed to go onto that small boat, to go from big ship, small boats, which is not attached to the big ship, because it's wedged between these ships which are attached one to another. That's what the novelty is according to Rava. Okay? Amr le Rav Safra. Rav Safra says to Rava, Moshe, Shapir Ka'amras, Moshe, are you speaking well? Now, Rava's name is not Moshe. Okay, Rava's name is Rava. Okay, parenthetically, it's just an interesting thing how there's different periods of history, but certainly during the times of the Gemara, they clearly did not have what we'll call Jewish names, right? Many of the names are Aramaic names, and that's totally fine. Rava might be a variation of like a rabbinic name, but it seems like it's actually his name. They didn't all have in addition, call them Abaye. These are not quote unquote Hebrew names. They're not Jewish names, but these were just names that they had, and that was fine. I'm not sure where the trends are. I never did the research, but the trends were all of a sudden that became out of vogue, and we additionally give people Hebrew names. During the times of the Gemara, that was not the case. Okay, so why is he calling him Moshe? His name is not Moshe. It's not his Hebrew name. I just was saying that. Rava's real name is Rava. Why is he calling him Moshe? So sometimes we've seen the Amoraim and Tanaim being very sharp with one another, but sometimes they're actually quite complimentary. So over here, Rav Safra is being complimentary. He's saying, "I treat you like Moshe, right? Moshe." Like he says, you're like Moshe to me, but. Are you sure what you're saying makes sense, right? So it's in the context of, whenever you criticize someone, you also want to elevate them at the same time. And over here, Rav Safra is saying to Rava, Moshe, he's elevating him. Are you sure this is the halacha? Are you sure this makes sense, right? What's his question? His question is, Mitzaltlin mizo lizotznan. The Mishnah says you're allowed to carry from one ship to another ship, right? Which implies that we're talking about the ships that are attached to one another, and you're going directly from one to another. There's no mention, there's not even an allusion to this little boat in between. So it's true. What you're saying might be the halacha, but there's no indication of that in the Mishnah whatsoever. The Mishnah implies that they're actually going literally from one ship to another without a little boat in between. So Elam Rav Safra. Therefore, Rav Safra says, you know what the Mishnah is talking about? We're talking about joining together to create an Erev and carrying from one ship to another. Okay, so this is an important halacha, not so well known, again, because we have a broader Erev. But if you have a scenario where you have a couple of private domains, and they're private domains, and you want to be carrying from one private domain to another, what you need to do is to connect them with an Erev. To connect them with an Erev, what is the Erev in the context of the Erev over here? The Erev we're talking about over here is not an Erev that is the strings that are surrounding it to make it one domain, but rather what it is that you have one shared food, and like some matzah or egg, whatever, some matzah that is sitting in one of the person's houses, and that is picked up and acquired on behalf of everyone as an Erev, and that allows carrying from one to another. Okay, parenthetically, did we ever talk about about being in a hotel? Did we ever talk about that? Yeah, we spoke about hotel or apartment buildings where there is discussion about whether you could even carry, if you're in a hotel and there are other Jews there, do you actually have to make an eruv to go ahead and carry outside, right? Or carry, not outside, in the hallway. The hallway would be like somewhat of a shared space, right? So we had this discussion. Ramosha is Mekel, but there is a lot of discussion. Over here, certainly you would need an eruv to be able to carry from one boat to another, and that's what the Mishnah is teaching us. The chiddush is, the novelty is, if they're attached, then you are allowed to then go ahead. If you make an eruv, then you'd be allowed to carry from one to another, and that is the novelty of this Mishnah. To say that if it's my ship, and your ship, and your ship, and your ship, and your ship attached together, and we're all together for Shabbos, so we have to make an eruv, and then we'd be able to go and visit each other on Shabbos. Yeah.
Does this imply that if there's not multiple owners, you would not need to have an eruv? They're still separate domains.
If there are
you
not,
need to somehow connect them.
Sorry, one more time. If they're not, meaning if it's one owner?
If it's one owner, they're still separate.
Yeah, but if it's all my domain, even though they're separate, you would not need an eruv. Yeah, the point is that it's dafka, meaning if they all belong to me, and that's what was bothering the Gemara in the beginning. The Gemara said that's obvious. If it's all belongs to one person, even though they're separate domains, and there is a space of carmelis between them, bottom line is we treat it, if they're attached, we don't need an eruv in that case. They would be attached to be seen as one. Okay. So the Gemara supports this with the brisa. V'cheletanya was taught in a brisa. Sfinos kshuros zo b'zov. Ships are tied together. Ma'arvin u'metaltlin mizo lezo. You're allowed to make an eruv. So here the brisa says explicitly, what you're allowed to do is not just carry from one to another. You're allowed to make an eruv and carry from one to another. And that's that again is what Safra spelled out for us. But now we see it's clear in a brisa. The brisa is stating this explicitly, that if the boats are attached together, you're allowed to make an eruv and carry from one from another. Nifsiku, however, if the ships became separated on Shabbos, and that's true. It's obviously forbidden, even though it started Shabbos with an eruv. If the eruv, but if they start Shabbos with an eruv and they're all attached, if they become detached, you'll not be allowed to carry from one to another. Chazru v'niksharu. If let's say they were tied together again on Shabbos, bein shogun, whether a person did them inadvertently, they didn't know they weren't allowed to do so. Bein mizidin, whether it was done on purpose, bein anusim, bein mutan, whether unwilling or accidental. In other words, no matter how it got attached, chazru l'tern harishon, then the ships return to the original permission to carry from one to another. Okay, so even though you should not be tying knots on Shabbos, we're going to get into a whole discussion up to and including when you take out the garbage on Shabbos. Are you allowed to be tying the top together? What are you allowed to do before you throw it out? So we'll get into all that. So tying on Shabbos, tying things together on Shabbos is not allowed. But whether a person did it by mistake or on purpose, once they are now attached together, then you're allowed to carry once more between the boats. Between the ships. Okay. The brisa now so fine. So we've now explained what the chiddush of our Mishnah is, and now we're going to continue reading that brisa that was just quoted and analyze it. So the brisa continues and says, "V'chein machzalos haprusos ma'arvin u'metaltlin mizolazo." Let's say you have mats that are hung in the public domain. So you could almost imagine like like one of those I don't know what the proper term is, like a homeless camp, where instead of like tents, they have like mats. They have these mats which are kind of like hanging to create private cubicles in the public domain. So you have a public domain, you have people living out there, and they want to have some form of privacy, so they hang these mats before Shabbos. Okay, and then you're allowed to go ahead and you are allowed to make an eruv. Let's say they want to carry from one to another, they want to share whatever that is, so they make an eruv. So they have I have my mat, you have your mats. Mats set aside as like cubicles, and then we want to be able to carry from one to another. So we make an eruv between us. Again, one person takes the matzah, whatever it is, and they make and now they're all considered one domain. So ma'arvin metalzim izolazo. So if the people from the various cubicles want to join in an eruv, they're allowed to do so. However, niglalu nesru. If the mats are later rolled up, let's say the police come along, whatever it is, they roll up the mats come down, then it's public domain. However, chazru v'nifreshu, let's say the mats are once again hung, bein shogun, bein mezidin, bein anusim, bein mutan, no matter how they're hung, whether it's by mistake or on purpose, etc., chazru l'tern harishon, then you're once again allowed to carry in this space. Okay, because a partition that is set up on Shabbos, whether it's done mistake or on purpose, it's considered a partition. Now, it's important to keep in mind, why would it be forbidden to set up? Because to create a partition on Shabbos is actually forbidden. It's not so well known. We had this issue. We used to have probably one bane of my shul existence was when Ner Tamid. I don't know if some of you here. Then when we had like the portion of the social hall to us, and the rest of the social hall was rented out, and so we were like like be cramped in this little place. Now, well, oftentimes the partitions were set up before Shabbos. You were not allowed to set up, but sometimes they weren't, and they would come and put up the curtains, this and that. You can't do it on Shabbos. It's like setting up it's no difference than setting up the Shabbos tents, which I know, I caused the kids to, whatever it is, setting up a tent is an issue. Setting up a mechitza is an issue. It's a form of building, even though it's not a most permanent structure necessarily. But setting it up on Shabbos is asur. But nonetheless, if you did set it up, halachically, it has the status of a mechitza, right? So I can't do it, but if I did, it is permitted to use that space to consider it valid, and that's what the Mishnah over here, the Bryce over here is telling us, that even though, so if it came apart, and then a person goes ahead, even though they did it deliberately, then it's a full-fledged partition, and now it goes back to being a private domain.
Even if a Jewish person does that for you, which is a forbidden action, you're allowed to benefit from
So again, it's because the point is it's a great meaning. Yes, the why, because it's a reality. It's like saying, meaning, is there a wall here? There's a wall here, right? Meaning we can't define. Meaning it's not like I'm trying to think of like a similar example. It's not like if someone cooks for you on Shabbos, you're not allowed to benefit from that cooking, right? But over here, it's not like someone's cooking for you on Shabbos. It's there's a wall here. Right, meaning there's like, okay, I can't benefit because like there's a Meiser Shabbos. Over here, the point is there's a wall. A wall creates a reality, and so it's not like I can negate the reality. The point is that it creates a reality, and therefore it just is. Okay, now as we'll see, it gets a little bit qualified, right? Because the Gemara is now going to ask, Amy, is that so that you're really allowed to permit carrying? Okay, Rav Nachman says, Lo shanu el lizrok aval taltal asar. Now, literally, these words mean that when regarding this wall, it was only taught for throwing as opposed to carrying. But that doesn't make sense, because there's no halachic difference between throwing and carrying. And so the way the Rishonim understand this is as follows. Rav Nachman says that when the Mishnah says, when we just said that the walls that are put up on Shabbos, by mistake, on purpose, etc., that is only regarding liability, not permissibility. Okay, the word lizrok means liability, meaning if a person throws from a public domain into one of these tents, into one of these partitioned walls that were set up on Shabbos, okay, they shouldn't have been, whether mistake or on purpose, and someone throws to them, they'd be chayav, okay, but it does not mean you're now allowed to carry within them. It does not recreate the domain. We're kind of like what you were saying. Rav Nachman says that, okay, this permissibility, it doesn't really mean you're allowed to now carry in it. All it means is if you throw from public domain into this area, you're going to be chayav. But it does not allow the person to start carrying within it because they were set up on Shabbos. Okay, but now the Gemara asks, what's going on over here? Rav Nachman is seemingly disagreeing explicitly with the Brisa. The Brisa said explicitly, it says it's a wall. How could you come along and it says chazru leter narishon? It was the earlier line says it goes back to its original permissibility. So how could you, Rav Nachman, come along and say no, it's not really permissible? It's only to make you chayav, but not to allow things. The Brisa says explicitly that it allows you to carry there. So now the Gemara concludes, Ki itmar to Rav Nachman. When did Rav Nachman say his halacha? Amazed itmar. Only regarding a person who did deliberately. In other words, like this. Rav Nachman is coming along and saying, although the Brisa said if the walls go back up, then you're allowed to carry within them, that's only if it was done by mistake. Okay? But if it was done on purpose, then the walls are considered a wall in the sense that if I throw from the private domain or carry from the private domain from the public domain into those walls, I'll be chayav. But if I set them up deliberately, I can't now go ahead and use them. There, to Max's point, the Chazal come along and knas you. Okay, so really, though technically there is a wall here, but Chazal will come along and knas you and say you cannot use this wall. So again, just to conclude, to summarize, a person has partitions in the public domain. Those partitions make consider a private domain. A person's allowed to make an eruv and now carry between those different partitioned areas, those cubicles. If they come down on Shabbos and a person goes in by mistake puts them back up. So if they come down on Shabbos, it loses its status. Makes sense. If they go back up on Shabbos, if it happened by mistake, then it's fully back to its original status. Person does by on purpose, and then there is a knas that we do not allow you to carry within it. But that's only a stringency. In other words, but if a person were to go ahead and throw from the public domain into that walled area, even when the person did it set up the walls on purpose, you'd be chai v'chatos because the walls do really make a private domain. Make sense? Okay. Fine. Let's go a little bit further about these ships that are attached. Amar Shmuel says Shmuel v'afilu shuros bechutz hasarbal. If the ships are tied together, even with a string of a cloak. String of a cloak is like a tie. In other words, like something like a very light, thin cord. It's considered attached. Ask the Gemara. Hey Chizami, What's the case? If this string that we're talking about is actually able to hold the ships in place, pshita. Who cares if it's a tie, a string, whatever? If it's able to hold it in place, of course. If it's something which is so thin that it can't hold them together, amai. Why should you be allowed to carry between them? In other words, what's Shmuel coming to tell me? Tell me. He's saying, okay, even by a thin string, very nice. What's the novelty? If it could hold it together, of course. Doesn't matter how thin or thick it is. If it can't hold it together, then why should it be considered attached? So the Gemara says like this: the olam diachal amidan. We're talking about a string that is able to hold the ships. Okay, so back to the question. Then, what's the novelty? Shmuel was coming to exclude, to teach us something that counters another teaching of his own, so that we don't get confused. What does that mean? There's another teaching of Shmuel, which we'll see, where he doesn't allow a string, okay, or it's not relevant to a string, and therefore he wants to just distinguish between that teaching and this teaching. What are we referring to? Ditznan was taught in a Mishnah. Kshara b'davar hamida. If someone ties a ship with something that's able to hold it in place, mevi la tuma, it brings tuma to the ship. Okay, so what is that? What are we referring to? We're referring to over here. Let's say you have tumas ohel. So the trend with docks. I don't know. I was in this area called Mineral, Virginia, and it's a very newly developed area. So everything's like all new construction, and their docks over there. Most of the docks are covered docks. Okay, it seems like when they built the homes, they basically built these covered docks. Nice, cool. One person had a dock with a little door, had a bar on the dock. Yeah, it was like, so he just had like his own little, it was this tiny little dock with a roof.
Sure you can be drunk.
Exactly. Chas v'shalom, you have to go carry from the house, which was 10 feet away. You have your own alcohol right there. Anyway, the point is that all the docks are covered. So let's say you have a case where there is a dock that's covered, that's an ohel. And let's say someone drank too much, okay, whatever, and they died. Tragic, okay, and they're sitting there on the dock, and under the dock, under the roof dock, covered dock, yeah, you have a string, the anchor or whatever, the cord that holds the boat, right? And then you have the boat over here, right? So anyone under the dock, everyone else drinking over there, and any other items over there, they're under the roofed area, and there is tumas ohel, right? We spoke about this before. There's a concept called tumas ohel, and anything, even the corpse is over here, but if the corpse the corpse is under this roof, everything under that roof we call tumas ohel. Anything there receives the status of tumah. But now we're talking about it. The cord is under the dock, okay, and then the cord is attached to a boat. Okay, so what's the status of the cord is going to impact how it impacts the boat that it's attached to, right? So that's the question over here. Says the Mishnah, if it's attached with something that's able to hold the ship in place, then it brings tuma to the ship. But if it's attached by like a small thin thread, which doesn't really hold it into place, then it's not going to bring tuma to the ship. And to this, Shmuel says, Shmuel says, barzel, but the ship must be attached with an iron chain or metal. Now, why does he say that? So before we see why. So Shmuel, by the ship and tuma, he says it has to be a metal attachment, a metal cord, a metal string that attaches the ship to the area that is enclosed in order for the ship, which is not under the roof, to become tameh. But there has to be a metal string, and that's why Shmuel over here had to say, don't think it has to be metal, just has to be something that can hold on to it. That's why Shmuel spoke up over here. And you may say, what's the novelty? Granted, it's not a novelty, but he's just contrasting with the other case, right? That's the difference. Okay, again, by Tumah, it has to be metal. By our case of an Erev of being attached, it doesn't have to be metal. Now the Gemara asks, what is the basis of that distinction? Linyan tumahu dichsebechalal cherev harehu kechalal. So regarding tuma, the pasuk regarding tuma says that a person who gets killed by a sword. Now, why does it have to say a person gets killed by a sword? You can say a person gets killed by anything. The fact that it says a person gets killed by a sword is to teach me that a sword is like the body. What that means is that if you have tuma that transfers from a person to a metal object, the metal object is going to assume the same level of tuma as the person. Now, the person is Avi Avos Tuma, is the highest level of Tuma. And so what Shmuel's coming along and telling me is that if the cord that is under the ohel, under the covered dock, is metal, then it becomes the same level of Tuma as a corpse, which is an Ava Tuma, and therefore will transfer the Tuma to the boat. But if it's a cord made out of rope, okay, as strong as it is, it doesn't have the same level of status of Tuma, and therefore will not transfer the Tuma to the boat. Okay, that's why it's distinct about metal. So when it comes to tuma, then it's the body has to be the sword, i.e., becomes like the body, meaning any metal becomes like the body. So there Shmuel says it has to be metal. Avalin in Shabbos, when it comes to Shabbos, when it comes to carrying from one ship to another, since the whole point is being able to hold them in place, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what the it doesn't really matter. What it's made of, as long as it's attached, then as long as it's attached and stays attached, then you are going to be chayav. Okay, so good news for all those who have been struggling with the fact that many of these halachos don't apply to us on a day-to-day basis. We are going to Bli Neder, Mir Hashem, finish the parak of Hazorek tomorrow, God willing, and then we're going to start a new parak which goes through the other 39 halachos, which will get into much more detail of many things which are going to be relevant to us every single Shabbos. Hopefully, a lot of halachos that we didn't know about. And okay, we'll take it from there. Have a wonderful day.
Top
The Amud was made for us.
stops with the Mishnah.
It was made for us.